Hello, I am the Script Doctor and welcome to the channel. It's part 2 of That Hope Is You. Wait, no it isn't. Far From Home? What happened to That Hope Is You part 2? Oh, it looks like the title has been changed since the last episode aired. It used to be That Hope Is You part 1, as shown in these examples I captured earlier, but now they've dropped the part 1, and the next episode is Far From Home. Okay then. This week's episode has us follow Discovery's arrival to the future. They exit the wormhole as Burnham did last week. However, instead of hitting another ship that disables their systems are not functioning because of the wormhole's tidal force. Or at least that's what Jet Reno calls it. It's some type of gravitational force that for some reason is so powerful the inertia dampeners of the ship cannot spare the crew from its effects. As a result, everyone on board the Discovery has passed out and suffered injuries. Very strange how a tiny suit of limited tech quickly assembled could protect Burnham from such issues. Yet a massive starship with more resources, power, and safety protocols can't protect its crew and is easily compromised under the same conditions. Saru is the first to wake and gets his bridge crew up and running to mitigate the ship's uncontrollable freefall. The ship strikes various asteroids orbiting the planet, helm control is unresponsive, shields are failing, and all systems are on the fritz. The crew is in a dire situation, and of course this is a perfect time to inject some levity as the ship heads towards a giant asteroid, and the pilot and navigation officers repeat "brace" over and over, conveying a childish panic as they crash through said asteroid covered in trees. Wait, are these asteroids or just chunks of the planet below caught in a strange orbit? The pilot, Detmer, after learning that the ship will disintegrate in 15 seconds after entering the planet's atmosphere, suggests doing a thermal roll. This is to take pressure off of the bottom of the ship's shields and put it on the top side. But what about the stern of the ship? You know, the part that's facing the planet and taking the brunt of the heat from entering the atmosphere? Are they planning to flip the ship so that the aft shields take resistance off of the stern too? Because that thermal roll isn't really going to do anything other than be a neat trick as the ship disintegrates. After she starts her roll, Saru remarks of a glacier that they are headed for. Detmer asks for a location of the thickest part with the highest density level.
I need a spot with the highest thickness and density levels.
Naturally formed ice has a consistent density of 919 kilograms per cubic meter. If you're finding ice that's more dense, it's probably not ice, but instead water, or, in the very rare case, ice phase 12, which is a tetragonal metastable dense crystalline phase. It is observed in the phase space of ice 5 and ice 6. It can be prepared by heating high-density amorphous ice from 77 Kelvin to about 183 Kelvin at 810 megapascals. It has a density of 1.3 grams per cubic centimeter at 127 degrees Kelvin, so approximately 1.3 times more dense than water. In other words, tetragonal ice is not something you can conveniently find naturally. Regardless, it is dialogue designed to sound smart, but when you have an education greater than a second grade student, it comes across as idiotic. If they wanted to have fun with science, an officer could alert the bridge crew that they're able to detect various phases of ice from cubic to tetragonal. From there, Detmer could ask to scan for phase 12 ice as it has more density, as I explained just now. Otherwise, if she wanted something more dense, she could go for water. But for a starship, that still puts you in a precarious situation once you come to a stop, because then you start to sink. Of course, this is Secret Hideout, the demonic child of Bad Robot, so starships rising out of water is standard operating procedure. What she should have said, since science is too difficult a task for these writers, is to request the location of the thickest level of ice and the greatest surface area. It's basic, it's simple, and it's not getting science wrong. I'm not even done on the ignorance of this scene. Saru orders the shields to activate in bursts and charge up a graviton beam. If shields are failing, would that not mean that they were active to begin with? Also, if something designed to protect your ship is failing, is turning it off and on again really a good idea in the midst of a crisis? Do we know if the shields will reset in strength when that happens? Oh, Saru is hoping that the burst will cushion their impact? Wouldn't the function of the shields provide more friction to reduce velocity and spare the hull from doing that job until the shields fail? Also, a graviton beam. Were those not used for closing and generating wormholes such as the one they traveled through, or in the case of Voyager, an entry port into fluidic space? So a graviton beam can alter the level of gravity of space, and because of that, the writers think it can be applied to a small surface area on a planet.
That's not how force works.
So of all the systems that are failing as they are crashing to the surface, their graviton beams are working? Wow, that is some great luck. I'm still not sure what they're intending the effects of graviton beams on solid objects is going to do for them, But hey, it's a special effect that someone on the production thinks is cool, so it's gotta be thrown in the episode. After they make their stop, a moment is taken to applaud Detmer for the crash landing, followed by sending her to sickbay to address her head injury, and then assessing the damage of their ship. While they aren't sure where or when they are, Jet Reno remarks how Terralisium wasn't particularly icy. Well, that may be true, but it's also an ignorant statement. I mean, it's a planet. It could have seasons and one of them be winter, and that's when they arrived. They may not know the date, but they know they're on a planet which could still be Terralisium, and on that planet in a hemisphere where it's currently winter. Plus, whether it's 100 years or 1,000, things on a planet can drastically change over time, so her assessment is quite ignorant and preposterous. We as the audience may know they're not on Terralisium, but the crew should not jump to such a conclusion based solely on a familiar season. Saru manages to shine a little in this moment as he gets a status update on the ship. Jet Reno speculates that the reason all of their systems are down is due to a damaged plasma manifold. Wow, one damaged manifold took out all those systems? A ship that size doesn't have backups or the means to reroute? She also adds that EPS relays and conduits that were blown out as a result need to be repaired or replaced. While I find it a tad absurd that an advanced ship like Discovery doesn't have backups in place to compensate for a primary manifold failure, the obstacle the crew is facing isn't a bad one. They have to work together to get the ship up and running, and it doesn't look like it will be an easy task. But it is at least one your average audience member can understand and retain. It's not overly convoluted and doesn't require frequent exchanges of technobabble. Pretty much everything is down except for life support. Also, for some reason they don't have internal communications, which is odd because their communicators have their own power source and function like a self-contained cellular network. They don't need a ship to work, so they could use those as an alternative to normal internal comms. I would have given them a point for a decent conflict, but they didn't provide context as to why they can't use their communicators in lieu of internal comms. One of the officers remarks how they can't find Michael Burnham, and we get a reaction from the rest of the bridge crew. I wish. No, the crew is dour at the prospect of Burnham being all alone. But Saru steps up and with a simple speech gets the crew to their feet and on task. Osuken, the navigator, argues that without internal sensors they can't locate what needs to be repaired. Is this the worst crew in Starfleet? We were just given the problems. The EPS manifold needs to be repaired. Then they need to check the relays and conduits. Do they not have access to the ship's specs? Are there not engineers aboard, besides Jet Reno, that know their way around a starship? How about the fact that the ship has shuttles and tricorders, things that have systems that aren't dependent on the Discovery that they could use to solve their problems? What's that? Discovery's internal sensors are down? Why not hop into a shuttlecraft and use their sensors to find the problems? Use tricorders to find injured people or locate damage in the ship. That's part of their function. Jet Reno offers to modify some tricorders to help with the task as she did on her original ship, but tricorders should already be able to do that, so there's no need to modify anything. Now, if they wanted to really make those communicators useless, they could try to use them and find heavy distortion and speculate that something in the atmosphere is disrupting their communicators, and whatever that something is may be the reason why sections of rock are floating in the sky like a cheap Avatar knockoff. That's my off-the-cuff suggestion of being able to take away the communicators. Now that the crew is on a goal of repairing the ship, we get a classic Star Trek Discovery inconsistency. In the following scene, Tilly was able to identify artificially created pockets of atmosphere on the planet. How was she able to do this if sensors are down? Did we skip something explaining sensors working? For an exposition dump confirming that their mission was a success, they're missing some vital context of how anyone from our crew is able to learn these things, when in the previous scene, we've been told the means to learn such things are inoperable. Why didn't Tilly open up her report with, "We've restored minimal sensors," or, "I realized that with ship sensors down we can still use the tricorders and found this"? They could have done this in a far more interesting way. Put Saru and Tilly in a shuttlecraft, have them fly out and survey the ship. As they're using the shuttle scanners, Tilly picks up the artificial atmosphere pocket. They confirm their mission is a success and identify key areas for repair. From there, Saru can inform Jet Reno where to focus repairs, and she can report to him that their translator needs to be rebuilt in order to restore ship's communications. And that gives us a smoother segue into the next goal for the story. But instead, we get Mr. Bryce in a Jeffries tube next to Saru and Tilly's conversation where he reveals the next objective. They can fix the translator, but only if they have enough rubidium. One thing to remember about 23rd century Star Trek ships is that they don't have replicator technology on board. They have food processors and matter resequencers that can create basic materials. We know replicator technology is in its infancy because one of the best Star Trek movies, The Wrath of Khan, has a plot point about a Genesis device, the means to quickly terraform a planet to handle the problem of growing population and food supply.
When we consider the cosmic problems of population and food supply, the usefulness of this process becomes clear.
Meaning if this project was proposed 20 plus years after the original time of discovery, they don't have the means to replicate what they need, so their only option is to salvage, scavenge, or trade. I don't know why, just as a responsible and precautionary method, they wouldn't have enough of this material on board, and if they don't have it in a cargo bay, they could also dismantle a shuttlecraft for parts and materials and rebuild the translator that way. But that wouldn't get our characters out of the ship, and the writers really want to justify flying everyone to Iceland for production, so we're going to get Tilly and Saru out of the ship and exploring this planet. But before they head out, Tilly reveals that the planet has life forms and ships that are warp capable but grounded because she can't detect any dilithium. What is even more strange is that not one officer in this briefing questions that there might be other means of traveling at warp that aren't dependent on dilithium. Now that the exposition regarding dilithium has been provided to the Discovery crew, it's back to interacting with the inhabitants to get communications restored. Saru argues that even if they arrived in the correct time, they have knowledge of past events they cannot share without impacting the present. What the hell is he talking about? All past events impact the present. That's how time works. It's future events that could change the past that are dangerous because of the potential change of the present and future. A time traveler going to the past can jeopardize their timeline and existence. That has consequences. Going to the future to observe has the only consequence of you being absent from your present. If you bring something from the future back to your present, you then risk changing the future you just left. This is how consequences work. There is no potential for changing the past or present with events that have already happened in the past. The writers are trying to invert the time travel prime directive without understanding the basic foundation of how cause and effect works. If anything, the entire motivation for secrecy should be because that they are at a disadvantage technologically and socially, not just because they're an incompetent crew, but also because societies can drastically change over the course of centuries. If the locals learn that by comparison they're primitive, they could be taken advantage of. So exercising caution is called for, but not for the reasons Saru has stated. He gives his orders of Non overseeing ship's repairs and Giorgio helping with the EPS grid, while he and Tilly prep to visit the inhabitants of this planet to barter for the rubidium they need. There is a side story between Dr. Culber and Stamets, but it is really poorly played. Does Wilson Cruz understand the situation he's in with this scene? Or was he directed to perform it in a cheery, sardonic way? He's a doctor in an emergency with all smiles and jokes where he should be exercising focus and brevity with his care. It's also strange to see two veteran actors who are playing a married couple having zero chemistry between them. At least the lack of chemistry is consistent, but because I don't believe their relationship, I can't empathize with them. Their exchanges between them appear to be more cute-driven than something character-driven. I'm not convinced by this contemporary line.
If you can spell, my partner brought me out of a coma and all I got was this lousy t-shirt.
Or this one.
Ow! Are you punishing me?
Yes. And I love you.
Or this one.
Because I need you out of there alive so I can kill you.
It's very strange. Stamets is the one with the brain injury in this episode, yet Culber is the one that's displaying the symptoms. Stamets finds his way to the spore drive where Jet Reno inserts herself into his duty task for the day, while making fun of the officer cleaning up the remains of Leland. His name is Gene, and Reno has forgot his name immediately after it was said. Whether intentional or not, forgetting Gene is definitely a metaphor regarding Secret Hideout's approach to Star Trek. Stamets locates the ruptured relay, and Jet Reno tags along, setting up their story of building their friendship while solving a problem. But didn't they do this last season?
I've already forgotten that.
Makes sense. Saru and Tilly cosplay as recently released prisoner Bruce Wayne from Batman Begins, and they make their journey to find a blue flower to carry to a building high above sea level, all with Hans Zimmer-esque background music. I jest, they're not actually picking a flower, but the rest is true. Tilly comments on how no one has ever been to this planet before, but we know that isn't correct because they're deliberately traveling to a settlement to trade for supplies. That's not something you can do if you're the first ones here. But, like with last week's episode, we find our characters on a very familiar road of exposition. This time, it's character exposition. We get their opinions of each other and Giorgio, and it's a little less in your face compared to what we saw between Book and Burnham. It also has an endearing aspect where Saru encourages Tilly to help build her confidence, to help her no longer doubt herself or her abilities. But should this not have been something addressed in the first season or when Tilly was a cadet and not a commissioned officer? Are they trying to make her the Reginald Barkley of the Discovery crew, capable but socially awkward? The scene abruptly ends when Saru spots another life form in the distance, and we cut to the Discovery where Non informs us of parasitic ice. Wait, what? Parasitic ice? What does that even mean? I know what ice is, and I know what a parasite is, but do the writers? A parasite lives in or on an organism of another species and survives by deriving nutrients at the host's expense. Does that happen here with the ice? Nope. All we learn is that the ice grows faster in the shade and that for some reason when the sun goes down, the ship is screwed. Okay, so you have started a conflict, but it's missing the verisimilitude. Does the ice have a parasitic effect on the ship? Is it pulling anything from the ship to feed it and make it stronger while putting the crew at risk? No? So why is this thing being referred to as parasitic? Why can't it just be ice? And why is it also a problem? It's a spaceship. It can survive the coldness of space, which tends to be colder than temperatures found on planets. A starship has phasers, emits light and heat. It can prevent the ice from forming on the hull. This really isn't much of a threat unless you can change the conditions of the planet. And luckily, because this is fiction, we can inject some science into it and make this conflict seem real. The parasitic ice would typically be the A-plot of a traditional Star Trek show, and while I find the concept idiotic, it can be revised to fit within the Star Trek brand. Here's my example. Let's say that it is not ice itself that is parasitic, but maybe there is a parasite that lives deep within the ice. Let's also say that this parasite needs iron to survive, so any life form or material that has iron in it would be considered this parasite's prey. The Discovery crashes into the ice. And let's say this planet's atmosphere is much greater than Earth's 1 megapascal, and thus the oxygen and hydrogen in the atmosphere freezes quickly. The crew can't go outside with EVA suits due to the pressure and limited oxygen to breathe, so we get a bottle episode situation. Let's add that this planet does not get a whole lot of sunlight as well due to a cloud-heavy skyline. In other words, make as much of the planet work against the Discovery as believably possible. By giving the planet a greater level of atmospheric megapascals, it allows for us to have a denser phase of ice form over the hull, and we can then play around with the crew trying to repair the ship and combat the growing ice because they detected something living within it that wants to feast on the iron in the hull and of many of the crew members.
Bum bum bum.
And that's how you turn a terrible concept of something like parasitic ice from stupid and nonsensical to a bit more believable and threatening. And all it took was me remembering elementary school level science and a Wikipedia search on ice for the finer details. It didn't take longer than 5 minutes to research and revise. And this goes back to what I've said before. Write what you know and know what you write. That's how you can solve problems and make the story you're telling seem more authentic. Back to the real show, the context of this parasitic ice is that they're worried about being entombed. Okay, but would this ice not melt in the morning? They have phasers. We saw Saru and Tilly equip them in their montage. We know from other Star Trek episodes that they can be used to generate heat. If you ask me, it looks like this parasitic ice is a non-issue. We return to Tilly and Saru on the surface, where they follow that other life form to a cave entrance that teleports them to a quaint little bar high in the mountains. The bar patrons greet them with their weapons drawn. The patrons reveal that they know they're from a Starfleet vessel, but demand that they prove they're Starfleet officers. Tilly decides to quote a regulation.
Starfleet Regulation 256.15, officers shall display behavior befitting an officer at all times.
So an officer shall conduct themselves as an officer. That's not a proper regulation. This is a proper regulation.
There's a dress code for detectives in robbery homicide. Section 3-605, .10, .20, .22, .24, .26, .50, .70, .80. It specifies clean shirt, short hair, tie, pressed trousers, sports jacket or suit, and leather shoes, preferably with a high shine on them.
Not only that, it's the same issue I had with the previous episode. Quoting a regulation or Starfleet serial code isn't irrefutable evidence. There's always reasonable doubt, especially in this situation where the bar patrons have no means to verify any claim made to them. It's actually quite stupid of them to even ask Saru and Tilly to prove that they're Starfleet. It would be far more natural for the patrons to scoff at the idea and mock them as being Starfleet until they find their ship and see their crew wearing Starfleet uniforms and revealing records confirming their identity. But then again, they could view all of that as a forgery, and it doesn't even matter because in truth it is completely irrelevant to anything. But for some reason, Tilly making that statement about not being scared when phasers are drawn on her and then saying that she's scared confirms that she's Starfleet, and they lower their weapons. What? Okay, From there, Cal, their de facto leader, tells the others that they're going to be helped by Starfleet because that's what Starfleet does. There's an exchange of exposition. Saru is willing to make an arrangement with them for repairing their translator, but because some character named Zara will arrive to investigate the discovery, many don't want to help them and encourage Saru and Tilly to leave immediately. Tilly volunteers that they have dilithium and are willing to trade for assistance, which is pretty much overstepping her authority, but Saru rolls with the information and offers to make a trade. Cal offers to fix their translator and expresses their need to hurry before Zara arrives. On Discovery, Stamets locates the final relay to repair and suggests Jet Reno head into the Jeffries tube to do the job. But she claims invalid due to her spine, and Stamets justifiably asks why the heck she's here. Her response is moral support and argues that Stamets has been boasting about not being in pain for the past 2 hours, only for him to reveal that he is in actual pain. She reminds us that he was stabbed in the chest and after being healed is still not in the best of shape.
Helpless is a shitty feeling, but it is not forever, and it doesn't make you any less capable.
That's very true, Jet. So why don't you take your own advice, hop on up in that Jeffries tube, and fix that relay? What we're seeing here is a classic form of manipulation. Jet offers to get another officer involved to finish the relay specifically to damage Stamets' ego. Stamets can't have that, so he decides to risk his health and the safety of the ship by crawling into the tube. After getting their translator repaired, Saru learns that Zara is a courier who has been exploiting these people since he executed the original courier and took over the area. Saru raises an interesting question to the barkeep when asking why the Federation has not intervened. Now, some may ask, why should Saru think the Federation still exists, comparing it to Burnham's reaction in the previous episode? The difference here is that the patrons knew what Starfleet is and didn't claim that they were worshipping ghosts or that Starfleet is gone, which is what Book conveyed to Burnham earlier. As I said in the previous Discovery review, Burnham's reaction to that information is out of character. But from Saru and Tilly's perspective on this particular interaction, they believe Starfleet is still around because of what Cal told them, and so Saru surmises that the Federation is still around as well. So it's not a contradiction here to ask about the Federation. But since the audience knows from the previous episode that the Federation and Starfleet don't really exist in the same way anymore, this creates dramatic irony, and we see from the barkeep's reaction that he knows something Saru does not. Before Saru can tip his hand and reveal that he's from the past, Zara shows up, trapping everyone in the bar. But how is this a problem? When Tilly and Saru entered, they were greeted by 5 aliens. When Zara shows up, he has 4 henchmen. With Tilly and Saru on the side of the bar patrons, that gives them the numbers of 7 versus 5. We know the patrons have weapons, so why the hell aren't they drawing their phasers and knocking out Zara with the stun setting? They have the advantage. Also, didn't Tilly inform us earlier that there's around 50 life forms living in this outpost? Why aren't they all together and armed? Or do they only have the 5 phasers we saw drawn on them earlier?
It just raises too many questions.
So at some point between the scenes, 2 patrons have vanished from the bar and that makes the odds even. On top of that, the lookout has his phaser drawn and ready. The people in the bar have a clear advantage here. As soon as Zara arrives, they should open fire, reducing his numbers and changing the status from fear to confidence. But a key indicator of bad writing is lowering the competence of one side to make the opposite side superior. By a basic understanding of survival instincts and behavior, this scene should not be playing out with Zara in control. Zara needs more men to secure the intention the writers are trying to convey. What follows is nothing substantial outside of exposition through a contrived context. Zara reveals how he was able to figure out that Saru and Tilly are from the past. His ship detected the wormhole and its effects, and when seeing an old piece of technology, remarks how it's an easy fix with up-to-date tech. The writers are working really hard to make this leader of a small band of thugs intimidating, but it just doesn't feel earned to me because I can't help but keep thinking how Zara is outnumbered. It's not like a couple of guys came into a bank and surprised everyone. We saw these aliens tell us that Zara would be coming and then spotted his ship and then took no measures to defend themselves. The situation is so asinine that I can't enjoy the dynamic the show is conveying. For me, they have lost my suspension of disbelief. It gets worse when Zara kills Cal with a torturous energy weapon, and no one in the bar takes the advantage of shooting Zara. No one thinks to kill or capture the leader and compromise the income of his subordinates in the process. Zara takes inventory of their items and negotiates with Saru for dilithium in exchange for... well, I'm not sure, as that part of the transaction wasn't really brought up. We are left to infer that it is a hostage situation and that the dilithium will be exchanged for their freedom. But come on, what bad guy holding all the cards would really allow that deal to work out mutually? The scene is broken up with the progress between Jet Reno and Stamets. We learn that Giorgio lied about helping them out, obviously to come to the rescue of Saru and Tilly, and as the ice grows over the Discovery, it starts to crush the hull somehow. This results in the ship shaking, and Stamets gets injured while in the tube and begins to bleed out. A cute blonde officer arrives to help, but instead of going into the tube to get Stamets, Jet Reno orders her to get the doctor instead. Why not have her remove Stamets from the tube and carry him to sickbay? She could quickly fix the relay, restoring power before pulling Stamets out, and Bob's your uncle, the ship is restored and Stamets can get the proper care he requires. But I guess those types of actions are too competent for the crew of Discovery, so it's time for an unnecessary delay to rack up a false dramatic situation. Speaking of false dramatic situations, Giorgio has been captured by Zera's goons and tossed into the bar. Here, she proceeds to antagonize Zera. His response is to torture her with his particle weapon, and she manages to thwart him by kicking a barrel his way and his henchmen being too incompetent to fire their own weapons to stop her. So Giorgio does some martial arts, Saru fires darts from his skull, and Zera is now in submission with his henchmen dead. One thing that bothers me about the 21st century in film is how fight choreography has become a lost art. Giorgio wants to kill Zera, but Saru denies her that opportunity, which is a cool little conflict between the two. Saru will maintain the protocol and ethics of Starfleet, and Giorgio will live and behave the way that got her to power in the Mirror Universe. This is a good status game and character dynamic. Unfortunately, it is interrupted with Tilly informing us of the upcoming act break by specifying that night has come. After the break, we return to the Discovery where a Culber shows up to bitch at Stamets for doing his job, and Jet Reno instructs him how to fix the EPS relay step by step. Again, this situation could have been avoided if that other officer went inside to fix the relay and rescue Stamets. In fact, they probably would have beaten Nightfall and got that ship out of the ice a lot earlier. It is a very boring scene, and what's even more pathetic is that Reno's instructions don't even appear to be helpful because the part Stamets has to replace appears very self-explanatory. Stamets fixes the relay, the ship powers up, and the unnecessarily long and drawn-out problems have been solved. Now it's time to solve their communications issue by heading back to the bar where Saru and Giorgio continue their debate over what to do with Zera. Zera threatens the barkeep, ordering him to shoot them or he will destroy the tech that generates the breathable atmosphere. A silly and ballsy demand, as in order for him to deliver on that threat, he first has to escape this situation. And since that's not happening and the barkeep is a clever alien, he refuses to harm Saru and Giorgio. Giorgio finally surrenders her weapon, and Saru offers the barkeep his assistance in fixing his ship and mining equipment. As a token of their gratitude, Saru leaves Zera's fate in the hands of the barkeep. The barkeep decides to free Zera into the cold. While Zera doesn't think he will survive, the barkeep asks for Tilly's survival pack to give Zera a chance. Before he leaves, Giorgio threatens his life if he tries to return to get revenge on this outpost. So there's this possibility that we'll probably see him come back later this season. The barkeep gives Saru a personal transporter, and the team is able to install the repaired translator, and now most of the ship's systems are fully functional. This takes us to the final problem: escaping the ice that has formed around the ship. Detmer is zoned out for some reason, but is ordered to try and get Discovery off the ground. What is strange is that we're told that the ship needs a few minutes for shields and other systems to come back online, but Saru doesn't want to wait for those systems and instead orders liftoff. If the shields only need a few minutes, why not wait for them and use the shields to break the ice covering the ship? They should be able to do that. They are a particle field that surrounds the ship, and in order for it to surround the ship, it would have to cut through the ice, thus separating it from the larger mass, and thus making it easier for the ship to leave the planet. What's also strange is that they're only using thrusters to escape the ice. Why not the impulse engines? They are pretty powerful and can accelerate the ship close to light speed. Certainly that amount of force would allow the ship to break free of the ice. But we can't have that. The writers need Discovery to still be helpless so that when another ship flies above them, their situation becomes more dire. What's really strange is that one of the officers identifies this new ship approaching as an enemy. How does he know that? His line should be, unknown vessel approaching, not an enemy. They don't know its intentions. It would only become designated an enemy vessel after they've attacked, not before. It's a poor attempt at manipulation of the scene. The Discovery's trapped, and now they're in deeper trouble because this enemy ship approaches. But it is not an enemy ship, it's Burnham. She tractors the Discovery to freedom and opens a channel where we see her with long braids and learn that she's been searching for the Discovery for the past year. Her hair grew awfully long and fast in that 1 year. Or did Book do his prayer chant thing to help Burnham's hair grow longer because she felt like a style change? Compared to last week's episode, this one is a little bit more enjoyable, but that has more to do with the fact that the characters are in far more precarious situations, and because they are more likable than Michael Burnham, it is easier for us to want to see them succeed. It's not easy for us to want Burnham to succeed because she always wins, and in the majority of situations, it's effortless for her. In this episode, the crew each face difficulties that put in question whether they will reach their goal. That's where you get doubt, drama, and hopefully entertainment. But one thing I noticed in watching this episode is the very familiar story structure between this episode and the previous one. Both Burnham and Discovery crash on a planet. Both have to traverse the planet to get something they need to find each other. Both encounter an authority figure that threatens their success. Both have secondary stories involving a ticking clock, only in this episode the time frame is defined but the actual threat isn't really a threat. so that is what it is, I guess. And both the Discovery crew and Burnham encounter characters that were waiting for their arrival. It's such a familiar pattern of story beats that I suspect these 2 episodes were originally one. I think the intention was to have it appear that Burnham and the Discovery landed on opposite sides of the same planet and were both trying to find each other, only for the twist to be that Burnham's story was taking place a year earlier than Discovery's. But I think that when the production was editing the episode, it didn't stick the landing, and so the writers had to go back, break it up into 2 separate episodes, and shoot extra scenes to have it make more narrative sense. It is just my speculation based on the content I've seen of these 2 episodes, and how some of the subplots of each feel like filler. All of that site-to-site transporting away from the mercantile security, that moment in the lake where Burnham heals her shoulder, and the subplot of the transworms could all be cut, along with Jet Reno and Stamets fixing the relay, and after combining what's left, you'd still get just over an hour-long episode. Well, now that our crew's reunited, we have 10 more episodes to see what they're going to do next in this future. And given the sloppy, pragmatic narrative structure of these first 2 episodes, I think we're in store for a confusing, nonsensical, and convoluted ride to the season finale. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe. If you have anything to add to this episode, please leave a comment below. Thank you for watching, and never forget, it all starts with the script.